Unit 7, Track 17.
How will you send the tickets?
I can give you a couple of options. The first is by email, but of course you'll need to print them out yourself. Alternatively, there's 24-hour speed mail.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we send them to you by mail and you'll get them the next day. We'll also send you a text message to your mobile to let you know they're on their way.
I think I'll go for that option.
Fine. Now, you had some questions.
Yes, I understand that there are some talks being given by authors. There's one in particular I'd like to go to, by the novelist Sandra Harrington. Do you know what she'll be talking about?
Well, she's got a new novel which just came out, so she'll be talking about that, and we'll probably read a few bits from it. She'll also be answering some questions about the book she wrote last year. I can't remember what it was called.
Fire and Eagles?
That's the one. You'll probably remember she got into a bit of trouble because some people said she had copied another writer's ideas. So it should be quite interesting.
And do I need to book a place in advance if I want to go to one of the talks?
You do, yes. You need tickets and you can only get them in advance by filling in a form on our website. You then pick them up from the ticket office when you arrive at the fair. We'll send you more information about the talks when we send you your tickets for the fair itself.
How much are they?
Oh, nothing. They're free.
Oh, great, thanks. And what's the best way of getting to the fair from the city centre?
Are you driving?
Probably not, what with the way the traffic is these days.
Well, Duke's Court Underground Station is only a minute's walk away. Does that help?
I'm only a short walk from a station at my end, so that's probably my best option. OK, one last question. Is there anywhere to eat at the fair?
Oh, there are lots of cafes and restaurants there. They're generally OK, but unless you're prepared to spend a fortune on a sandwich and a cold drink, I'd go somewhere else.
Such as?
Well, you'll be much better off going to one of the cafes or restaurants in the streets nearby. Oh, don't tell anyone I said that, though.
I won't, thanks. So, how should I pay for the ticket?
Unit 8, Track 18.
Hello, everyone. In a few minutes, we'll be setting off on our trip to the Palace of Com-on-Barney. There are a few things I should mention before we go, so please pay careful attention. Now, there are 3 groups of us on this trip, and we'll be using 3 coaches to get to and from the palace. They each have numbers on the front, and ours is Coach 2. Please check that you board the right one, both at this end and when we come back. Otherwise, I'll be running around looking for you. So, Coach 2. The palace is probably going to be very busy, so please stay close to me when we get there. If you lose me, head for the main gate, which is opposite the ticket office, and you'll find me there. Alternatively, call me on my mobile. The number's in your information pack. Your pack also contains a card called a Freedom Key. Keep hold of this, as you can use it to get money off in the cafes and restaurant at the palace. Now, these days, the palace is a museum, but you'll be surprised to hear that people still live there. No, they're not kings or queens, but local people who work at the palace and their families. Many of them wear traditional clothes, so they make a great subject for a photograph. But please ask them if it's okay before doing this. These people may also offer to sell you small wooden and stone statues that they've made. They make lovely souvenirs. They'll probably ask you for about $20 or so for these, but it's perfectly acceptable. Indeed, it's usually expected to offer them less. 30% below the asking price would be an acceptable figure, but please don't try to go lower than that. The statues, by the way, are a copy of the large statue of King Hupugata, which is just inside the main gate. A quick word of warning. This is of great significance to the locals, and while nobody will object to you photographing it, they don't like people touching it. So hands firmly in pockets when you walk past him, please. OK, so that's the boring stuff out of the way. Does anyone have any questions about the...
Unit 8, Track 19.
I'd like to briefly tell you about a few of the main attractions at the palace. You'll find these on the map in your information pack. Now, one of the first things you'll see is the statue of King Hupugata, which I just mentioned. This is on the right-hand side of Monument Court, the main square inside the palace grounds. Monument Court so called because of the many statues of kings, queens, and other historical figures there. Dating back to 123 BCE, the king's statue is 6 meters high, made of stone with a layer of gold and dotted with jewels. That's genuine gold, by the way, not just paint. Unfortunately, the jewels are made of glass. The originals were stolen many centuries ago. Just beyond the court is the Temple of the Sun. This is the oldest part of the palace and is estimated to be about 2,700 years old. It originally had a roof, but now there are just the columns that supported it. There are 130 of them altogether, each one rising between 20 and 25 meters from the ground to support a frame of iron bars on which the roof originally rested. To the left of the Temple of the Sun is the new palace, and it's here that you'll find the royal chambers. It's called the new palace because it's the newest part of the palace complex, although it was actually completed in 1346, which makes it quite old, really. Anyway, the royal chambers were where kings and queens from the middle of the 14th century had their private rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms, things like that. It was also where they would have kept all their valuables, although these have now been moved to the Palace Museum, which is also worth a visit. This was opened in March 2011. As well as valuables like jewellery and other historical objects, the museum also houses an impressive collection of weapons, including a sword that is said to have belonged to King Hupugata himself.
Unit 9, Track 20. Hello, Joe. Come in and take a seat. I wanted to talk to you about your essay on weather control.
Right. What did you think?
Well, let's start by looking at your introduction. You say that global warming is causing extreme weather conditions around the world.
That's right, isn't it?
Well, you need to be careful here. Yes, there is a lot of evidence that this is the case, but the issue is still controversial. You need to specify that many experts believe this is the case, rather than saying this is how it is.
Okay.
Then you look at the issues surrounding extreme weather, and how it has a negative effect in some countries.
I was worried that section was a bit disorganized.
No, not at all. It's very good. But I was slightly surprised when, in the same paragraph, you mentioned an advantage of extreme weather.
Not the right place for it?
Not really, no. In fact, I would question the need to put it there at all. At one point, you're talking about droughts, hurricanes, floods, etc. And then suddenly you're talking about people being able to sunbathe on the beach in January.
I see what you mean. I think I was going to elaborate on that, add more information, but I guess I forgot to do so.
Okay. Then there's the section on weather control programs. This made interesting reading, but your ideas didn't really lead on from each other. Did you write a plan before you did this?
No.
Well, you really ought to. Here's an example. You talk about experiments to control hurricanes. Then you write about rain-making experiments. And then for no apparent reason, you go back to talking about hurricane control.
So, a bit messy.
A bit, yes. Next, you go on to talk about something called cloud seeding. Great. You gave a good, clear explanation about what cloud seeding is, that it's a way of using science and chemistry to make clouds produce rain. And you give some examples of where it's been used.
So, that section's all right.
Well, listen to this. The chemical silver nitrate is introduced into clouds to encourage them to produce rain. Silver nitrate?
Oh, that was careless. I meant silver iodide.
Exactly. I would hate to think what might happen if you started firing silver nitrate into clouds. Okay, finally, the conclusion.
I always have problems with the conclusion. I never really know what to say.
Well, you summarize your main points and give a few opinions, which is great. But you then start talking about environmental systems. This was not only in the wrong place, but I couldn't see where it fitted in with the rest of the essay generally.
Right. So there's a bit of room for improvement then.
Unit 9, Track 21. All right, let's go back to the section in your essay on cloud seeding. Apart from your silver nitrate, silver iodide mistake, you've missed a few bits out.
Have I?
I'm afraid so. What I'd like you to do is talk me through the process of cloud seeding, what it involves, and so on. And I'll stop you if you've forgotten something, okay?
Fine. Well, first of all, silver iodide is fired into the cloud from the ground using a rocket.
Good. And you could mention that sometimes it's dropped from above by aircraft.
Right. And this is the first stage, the primary stage, which is called static seeding.
Mm-hmm.
The silver iodide causes a chemical reaction with the tiny water drops in the cloud and they freeze.
Okay, so you've got millions of tiny ice particles because the water droplets in the cloud freeze. What happens next?
Next, there's a process called riming. R-I-M-I-N-G.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the ice particles, well, they join up to form bigger pieces of ice, and when they're heavy enough, they fall from the sky.
Good. And then?
Well, as they fall, they turn to rain or snow. And, well, that's it, isn't it?
Well, usually, yes. But you've mentioned that there's a first stage, a primary stage. So surely you should have mentioned...
Oh, the secondary stage.
Which is known as...
Dynamic seeding, of course.
Mm-hmm.
How could I have left that bit out? Let me think. Okay, so the water droplets turn to ice and...
What happens when water freezes? When anything freezes, for that matter? Something that may seem surprising?
Oh, of course. It releases heat.
Mm-hmm, exactly. It releases heat. And what can happen to a cloud when freezing water inside it does this?
The cloud gets bigger and contains even more moisture.
Exactly. And not only do they become bigger, but they also...
They, produce storms. No, hang on, that's not right. They last longer, that's it.
Right. They last longer, which means they can be seeded again to produce even more rain.